The surveillance cameras captured everything that night at the Silver Plate restaurant. 4 armed professionals entering, one ordinary waitress standing between them and their target. But what happened in those 7 minutes was supposed to stay buried forever. You know what's funny about being invisible? It's exactly what you think you want, until the moment you realize you've disappeared so completely that you've forgotten who you used to be. Lena Shaw knew this feeling intimately. Every night, she'd tie her apron around her waist at the Silver Plate, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, and she'd become no one. Just another face in the background. Another pair of hands refilling water glasses. Another smile that guests looked through rather than at. And that's exactly how she wanted it. The Silver Plate wasn't just any restaurant. It was the kind of place where politicians made deals over $40 appetizers, where business mergers were signed on cloth napkins, where the city's elite came to see and be seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. The carpet was so thick your footsteps made no sound. Everything about the place whispered wealth and power. But Lena? She was part of the furniture. Invisible. Forgettable. Safe. That Tuesday night started like any other. The dinner rush was winding down. Table 7 needed more bread. Table 12 wanted their check. Lena moved through the dining room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, her body on autopilot while her mind wandered to safer, quieter places. She didn't think about Afghanistan anymore. At least, that's what she told herself. She didn't think about the sand that got into everything, or the weight of body armor in 120-degree heat, or the faces of the people she'd served with. She didn't think about the mission that went wrong, or the betrayal that followed, or the night she'd had to choose between her duty and her survival. No. She'd left all of that behind. She'd erased Sergeant Lena Shaw, Special Forces operative, and created this new person, this waitress with a fake name on her W-2 and a studio apartment she paid for in cash. Being no one was exhausting, but it was better than being hunted. Miss, could we get more water, please? Lena snapped back to the present. Table 9. A man dining alone, which was unusual for the Silver Plate. Most guests came in pairs or groups, doing business or celebrating something. But this man, mid-40s, expensive suit, confident posture, sat by himself, reading something on his phone between bites of his meal. Of course, Lena said with her practiced smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She didn't know his name yet, but she'd learn it soon enough. Alex Vance. Billionaire CEO of Vance Tech, a defense contractor worth more than some small countries. The kind of man who had enemies he didn't even know about. As Lena approached his table with the water pitcher, something made her pause. Instinct. That's what they'd called it in the military. That sixth sense that separates those who come home from those who don't. The feeling that something is wrong before your conscious mind can identify what it is. For men had just entered the restaurant. To anyone else, they probably looked normal enough. Well-dressed. Moving with purpose. But Lena saw what others missed. The way they scanned the room too carefully, the bulge under the second man's jacket, the military precision in how they positioned themselves. Her heart rate spiked. No, no, no. Not here. Not now. The men moved through the dining room with practiced coordination. Lena's training kicked in automatically, her mind cataloging threats, exits, weapons. The lead man was heading straight for table 9. Straight for the man waiting for his water. Straight for Alex Vance. And then Lena saw it. The barely perceptible nod between 2 of the men, the way the 4th one moved to block the kitchen entrance, the subtle reach toward concealed weapons. This wasn't a dinner reservation. This was an execution. Time seemed to slow down. In that split second, Lena had a choice to make. The same choice she'd been avoiding for 2 years. She could do nothing. She could be invisible, like she'd trained herself to be. She could let whatever was about to happen, and stay safe in her cocoon of anonymity. These weren't her wars anymore. This wasn't her fight. Or she could do what she was trained to do. What she'd spent years perfecting. What she'd promised herself she'd never do again. The water pitcher felt suddenly heavy in her hand. Everyone sees what they want to see, her old commander used to say. Use that. The lead mercenary was 3 feet from Alex Vance's table when Lena moved.
She didn't think.
Thinking gets you killed. She acted. The water pitcher became a weapon. She swung it hard, catching the lead man across the temple before he could reach for his gun. The pitcher shattered. Water and glass exploded across the pristine white tablecloth. The man went down hard. Chaos erupted. Screams.
Chairs scraping.
The other diners realizing something was terribly wrong. The second mercenary spun toward her, his hand going for his weapon. But Lena was already inside his reach, using his own momentum against him. She grabbed the wine bottle from table 9, a 2015 Bordeaux, probably worth $300, and brought it down on his wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. She didn't feel like a waitress anymore. She felt like a soldier. The third man was faster, more experienced. He had his weapon out, but couldn't get a clear shot with Alex Vance directly behind Lena. Good. She'd positioned herself that way deliberately. Get down, she shouted at Vance, not looking at him, every ounce of her focus on the threats. She grabbed the steak knife from the table setting. It wasn't military grade, but it didn't need to be. She'd been trained to turn anything into a weapon. The fight lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes that felt like 7 hours. Lena used the heavy peppermill from the serving station as a baton. She used table corners, chair backs, the geometric layout of the dining room itself. She fought like someone who'd done this before in places where the stakes were life and death, in desert compounds and mountain villages where hesitation meant you didn't come home. She fought like someone who'd been pretending to be helpless for so long that she'd almost forgotten she was dangerous. The second mercenary tried to get back up. She kicked his knee sideways. The sound it made would haunt the other diners for weeks. The third man came at her with tactical training. He was good, probably former military like her. They traded blows, crashed through tables, scattered terrified guests. He managed to land a punch that split her lip. She tasted blood. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated her. She fainted left, then drove her elbow into his throat. He went down gasping. When the dust settled, 3 men lay unconscious or incapacitated on the floor of the silver plate. The dining room looked like a war zone. Shattered glass, overturned tables, expensive meals ruined on the carpet. And Lena stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, a steak knife still in her hand, her waitress uniform torn and bloody. The fourth man, the one who'd been blocking the kitchen, was gone. He'd escaped during the chaos. She'd been exposed. The sound of sirens cut through the stunned silence. Someone had called the police. Of course they had. Lena's mind raced. She needed to leave.
Now.
Before questions were asked. Before her real identity was discovered. Before whoever sent these men realized they'd failed and sent more. But when she turned to run, she found Alex Vance standing there, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not fear. Not gratitude. Something else. Recognition. Who are you? He asked quietly. Nobody, Lena said, her voice shaking. I'm nobody.
But they both knew that was a lie.
Detective Maria Reyes arrived 12 minutes later with half a dozen squad cars. She was sharp. Lena could see it in her eyes, in the way she took in the scene, piecing together what had happened. I need statements from everyone, Reyes announced. Her gaze landed on Lena, lingered. Especially you. This was it. The moment Lena's carefully constructed invisible life would crumble. They'd run her fingerprints. They'd discover her real identity. They'd start asking questions she couldn't answer. And then Alex Vance stepped forward. Detective, he said, his voice carrying the weight of power and money. This woman saved my life. Whatever she needs, I'll provide it. Legal representation. Protection. Anything. Reyes raised an eyebrow. Mr. Vance, I appreciate your gratitude, but I still need to understand what happened here. Your waitress just took down 3 armed men with restaurant supplies. That's not normal. No, Vance agreed, looking at Lena with those knowing eyes. It's not. The restaurant security footage told a story that Lena couldn't deny. There she was, moving with military precision, neutralizing threats with brutal efficiency. The camera didn't lie. But it also didn't capture the most important detail. One of the mercenaries had escaped. That night, after the police had taken statements and cleared the scene, after Alex Vance had used his considerable influence to keep Lena out of custody, after the adrenaline had worn off and left her hollow and shaking, Lena returned to her small studio apartment. She stood in the doorway, key in hand, and knew before she even opened the door that something was wrong. The lock had been picked. Recently, her training screamed at her to run, but she was tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of being invisible. She pushed the door open. Her apartment had been searched. Not ransacked, this was professional. Subtle. But Lena could see the small signs. Drawers not quite closed. Books slightly out of place. Someone had been looking for something. Or someone had been sending a message. On her small kitchen table, illuminated by the streetlight coming through the window, was a photograph. Lena didn't need to pick it up to see what it was. Afghanistan. Her old unit. The mission that had ended everything. Underneath it, a note in neat handwriting. You should have stayed dead. Lena's phone rang. An unknown number. She answered. Miss Shaw. Alex Vance's voice was calm, controlled. I think we need to talk. Because whoever sent those men tonight isn't finished. And I don't think you can stay invisible anymore. He was right. The woman who'd spent 2 years being no one, who'd hidden behind water pitchers and forced smiles, who'd convinced herself that safety was worth the cost of her own identity, that woman was gone. And in her place stood someone who'd finally remembered what she'd been trying so hard to forget. She was Sergeant Lena Shaw, and she was done running. Lena wasn't in her apartment when it happened. She'd learned a long time ago to trust her instincts, and her instincts had been screaming at her since she'd found that photograph on her kitchen table. So instead of sleeping in her own bed that night, she grabbed a go-bag she kept hidden in her closet. Old habits die hard, and checked into a motel 6 blocks away under a fake name. She was sitting on the edge of a lumpy mattress, drinking bad coffee and staring at that photograph from Afghanistan, when her phone lit up with news alerts. Explosion in Lincoln Park. Building evacuated. No casualties reported. Her building. Her apartment. Her former life quite literally going up in flames. Lena sat very still, the coffee cup trembling slightly in her hands. Not from fear. From something else. Something that felt almost like relief. They'd tried to erase her. Again. But this time, instead of making her want to disappear further, it did something unexpected. It made her angry. For 2 years, she'd been so careful, so small, so quiet. She'd convinced herself that invisibility was survival, that being no one was the same as being safe. But watching the news footage of firefighters hosing down what used to be her home, she realized something. Hiding hadn't kept her safe. It had just made her an easier target.
Her phone rang.
The same unknown number from the night before. I saw the news, Alex Vance said without preamble. Where are you? Somewhere safe. No, you're not. Nowhere is safe right now. Not for you and not for me. There was a pause. I have a proposition for you, Miss Shaw.
Can we meet?
How do I know you're not the one who sent them? If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have intervened with the police last night. And I certainly wouldn't have spent the last 6 hours having my people dig into who might want both of us eliminated. Lena felt something shift in her chest. Both of us. This wasn't random, Miss Shaw. Someone on my board of directors sold me out. Someone gave those mercenaries my schedule, my security details, everything they needed to kill me. And now they're cleaning up loose ends. His voice hardened. You're a loose end. But you're also the only person I trust right now. Which, I'll admit, is a strange position for both of us. Lena closed her eyes. She knew what he was going to say before he said it. I need your help, Vance continued. Help me find who betrayed me. And in return, I'll give you something you can't get on your own. What's that? A real life. Not a fake identity that can be burned. Not a studio apartment and a waitress job. A real, untraceable, bulletproof new identity. The kind that money and connections can actually buy. The kind that lets you stop running. It was a deal with the devil. Or maybe it was a lifeline. Lena couldn't tell the difference anymore.
One condition, she said.
Name it. When this is over, you forget you ever met me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, I don't think that's going to be possible. But we can negotiate the terms when we both survive this. They met 2 hours later at a private office building that Vance owned. Real security this time, the kind Lena recognized. Former Secret Service, probably. They scanned her, checked her ID, and escorted her to a top-floor conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Alex Vance stood by those windows, silhouetted against the morning light. In the restaurant, she'd barely looked at him. Now she saw him clearly, a man who carried weight well, whose expensive suit couldn't quite hide the tension in his shoulders, whose eyes held the particular exhaustion of someone who'd just realized they couldn't trust their own people. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You didn't give me much choice. My apartment is ash." "I'm sorry about that." "Don't be." Lena set her go-bag down on the conference table. "I didn't have anything worth keeping anyway." That wasn't entirely true. She'd lost the photograph. The only one she had left of her old unit, the people she'd served with, the life she'd abandoned. But maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was time to stop looking backward. "Tell me about the board member," she said. Vance pulled out a tablet, brought up files. "His name is Carl Mercer. Venture capitalist. Been on my board for 3 years. Smart, connected, ambitious." He slid the tablet across the table. "And according to my head of security, my former head of security, who's now under house arrest, Mercer has been making a lot of unexplained contact with overseas accounts." Lena studied the information. Financial records. Phone logs. Travel history. It was good work, thorough. But something bothered her. "This is too clean," she said. "If Mercer is dirty, he wouldn't leave this kind of trail. Unless he didn't think anyone would look." Vance leaned against the table. "Vance Tech holds contracts with the Department of Defense. We develop cybersecurity systems for critical infrastructure. The kind of systems that, if compromised, could cause real damage." Understanding dawned cold and sharp. "He's not just trying to kill you. He's trying to sell access." "That's what I think. And I think last night was supposed to look like a random attack. Tragic billionaire murdered by criminals. The board would vote in a new CEO, probably someone Mercer controls. And suddenly he'd have the keys to systems that protect power grids, financial networks, military communications." Lena felt the familiar weight of purpose settling over her shoulders. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about stopping something bigger. "How do we prove it?" she asked. "There's a charity gala tomorrow night. Mercer will be there. So will most of the board, the mayor, half of Chicago's elite. Very public, very visible." Vance met her eyes. "I'm going to confront him. In front of everyone. Force him to make a mistake." "That's a terrible plan." "You have a better one?" Actually, she did. Over the next 24 hours, Lena did what she did best. She planned. She strategized. She turned Alex Vance's terrible plan into something that might actually work. They would need evidence. Real, undeniable proof of Mercer's betrayal. Which meant they needed to make him reveal himself. "He'll have a backup plan," Lena explained, pacing the conference room while Vance watched. "Men like Mercer always do. He's already tried to kill you twice and failed. He won't wait for a third try. If we spook him at the gala, he'll run. So, we let him run? So, we follow him when he runs. And we see where he goes. Who he calls. Who he's working with." It was risky. It required Lena to step fully into the light, to be visible in a way she hadn't been since Afghanistan. But as she worked alongside Vance, planning contingencies and backup plans, she realized something strange. She wasn't afraid anymore. Maybe it was because she'd already lost everything. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in 2 years, she was using skills that actually mattered. She wasn't refilling water glasses. She was doing what she'd been trained to do. She was protecting people. She was stopping bad things from happening. She was being useful again. The night of the gala, Lena stood in front of a mirror and barely recognized herself. Gone was the tired waitress in a stained uniform. In her place stood a woman in a fitted black dress, her hair styled, makeup covering the bruises from the restaurant fight. Vance had hired a whole team, stylists, security consultants, a tech specialist who'd wire her with a nearly invisible communications earpiece. "You look different," Vance said when she emerged. "I look like someone who costs money," Lena replied. "That's the point." "That's not what I meant." She knew what he meant. She looked like someone who existed. Someone who took up space in the world. Someone who mattered.
It was terrifying.
The gala was everything Lena had expected. Excessive wealth on display, crystal champagne flutes, string quartets playing Vivaldi. But she wasn't there to enjoy it.
She was there to watch.
And she was very good at watching. Carl Mercer arrived fashionably late, all charm and expensive cologne. He worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, playing the part of the successful venture capitalist perfectly. But Lena saw the tells. The way his eyes kept finding the exits. The frequency with which he checked his phone. The tension in his jaw when Alex Vance approached him. "Carl," Vance said warmly, as if they were old friends. "We need to talk. About the board meeting next week.
About the defense contracts.
About who you've been talking to." Mercer's smile never faltered. "Of course, Alex. Always happy to discuss business. Shall we find somewhere private?" "Oh, I think here is fine. Among friends." That's when Lena saw it, the moment Mercer realized he'd been caught. It was subtle. A flicker in his eyes. A slight stiffening of his shoulders. But it was there. "I don't know what you're implying," Mercer said carefully. "I'm implying that someone gave my schedule to a team of mercenaries 2 nights ago. Someone with access to my security protocols. Someone who stood to gain from my death." Vance's voice carried just far enough. Heads were turning. "And I'm wondering if you know anything about that." Mercer laughed. It sounded hollow. "Alex, this is hardly the place. The FBI seems to think it is. They'll be here shortly." That did it. Mercer's composure cracked. His hand went to his jacket pocket, going for his phone, probably, or maybe something else. Lena moved. She was across the ballroom in seconds, her hand closing over Mercer's wrist before he could reach whatever he was reaching for. The crowd gasped. Security started moving. "I wouldn't," Lena said quietly, her grip iron-tight. She'd learned in Afghanistan that sometimes the softest voice carries the most threat. Mercer stared at her, recognition dawning. You're the waitress. You should be dead."
Funny thing about that.
"I'm hard to kill." What happened next happened fast. Mercer tried to run. He made it approximately 15 feet before Lena had him on the ground, his arm twisted behind his back, his face pressed against expensive marble flooring. The FBI agents arrived 4 minutes later. Mercer was arrested. His phone, laptop, and documents were seized. Over the following days, the full scope of his betrayal would be revealed. Backdoor access sold to foreign nationals, classified information traded for millions, a conspiracy that reached further than anyone had imagined. But Lena didn't stick around to see it unfold. 3 days after the gala, she stood in the same conference room where this had all started, a new identity in her hands.
Passport.
Driver's license. Credit cards. Birth certificate. All real. All untraceable. "You kept your end of the bargain," she said to Vance. "I tried to." He looked tired but relieved. His company was intact. The threat was neutralized. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he looked sad. "So, this is goodbye?" Lena should have said yes. That was the deal. She'd helped him. He'd given her a new life, and now she'd disappear again. Properly this time. Permanently. But standing there, looking at this man who'd treated her like a person instead of a tool, who'd given her purpose when she'd forgotten she needed one, she realized something. She didn't want to be invisible anymore. "I have a counter-proposal," she heard herself say. "I'm listening. Your head of security position is vacant. You said it yourself. You can't trust your own people. You need someone who isn't connected to your world. Someone who can't be bought or compromised." Vance smiled slowly. "Are you applying for a job, Miss Shaw?" "I'm applying for a purpose. There's a difference." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Then he extended his hand. "When can you start?" That was 6 months ago. Now Lena Shaw, or rather, the woman who'd once been Lena Shaw and was now someone new, stands in a Vance Tech boardroom as the head of corporate security. She wears tailored suits instead of uniforms. She manages a team instead of hiding from one. She makes decisions that matter. She's visible. She's seen. She's home. The journalists would eventually piece together the story. The mysterious waitress who'd saved a billionaire's life. The conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate America. It would make headlines for weeks. But they'd get one critical detail wrong. They'd say that Lena was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. They'd say Alex Vance was lucky she'd been there. What they wouldn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that luck had nothing to do with it. Lena had spent years making herself small, teaching herself to be overlooked, convincing herself that survival meant erasure. But on that Tuesday night at the Silver Plate, when 4 armed men had walked through the door, she'd made a choice. She'd chosen to be seen. And in doing so, she'd discovered something that no amount of hiding could ever give her. She'd found herself again. Sometimes the most dangerous people in the world are the ones no one's looking at. The ones we overlook. The ones we underestimate. But sometimes, and this is the part that matters, sometimes those overlooked people are dangerous in the best possible way. They're dangerous because they remember who they used to be. They're dangerous because they refuse to stay invisible. They're dangerous because when the moment comes, when someone needs help, when evil walks through the door expecting an easy victim, they fight back. Lena Shaw had been running for 2 years. From her past. From herself. From the person she'd been before Afghanistan had changed everything. But you can't run forever. Eventually, life catches up. Eventually, you have to make a choice. Stay hidden and stay small. Or step into the light and risk everything. Lena had chosen light. And she'd found that the most terrifying thing about being visible, about letting people see who you really are, about accepting that you matter, is realizing how much you've been missing. On quiet days, when the office is empty and the city spreads out below her window, Lena sometimes thinks about that photograph she lost in the apartment fire. Her old unit. The people she'd served with. The version of herself who'd believed that duty and honor meant something. She doesn't have that photograph anymore. But she doesn't need it. Because she'd found something better than a memory of who she used to be. She'd found a reason to become that person again. Alex Vance had given her a new identity, yes. But more importantly, he'd given her permission to be herself. To stop apologizing for her skills. To stop hiding her strength. To stop pretending that being capable was something to be ashamed of. And in return, she'd given him something too. She'd given him the truth that everyone needs to learn eventually. The people who serve you, who work for you, who exist in the background of your life, they're not invisible. They're not nobodies. They're just waiting for someone to see them. The woman who'd once refilled water glasses and forced smiles now sits in executive meetings. She advises on security protocols. She protects not just one man, but an entire company, and by extension, the critical infrastructure that company safeguards. She matters. She exists. She's real. And every time someone new joins Vance Tech, every time a junior employee looks nervous or overlooked or invisible, Lena makes sure to catch their eye. To acknowledge them.
To see them.
Because she remembers what it felt like to be no one. And she's determined that no one else should have to feel that way. This is the story they won't tell in the documentaries or the corporate case studies. This is the story behind the headlines about the restaurant attack and the board member conspiracy. This is the story of a woman who learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to hide. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to let yourself be found. Lena Shaw was found that Tuesday night. Found by circumstances. Found by necessity. Found by a man who recognized that the person pouring his water might be the most capable person in the room. And in being found, she finally found herself. The surveillance footage was meant to be erased. The truth was meant to stay buried. But some truths refuse to stay hidden. Some people refuse to stay invisible. And some stories, the best stories, are about the moment when someone decides that being seen is worth the risk. This was that moment. This was that story. And this was that woman. The one who wouldn't run anymore.